Namaskar. This is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. It was in a budget speech for financial year 2021 that the finance minister had announced that the government had set an ambitious disinvestment target of 2.1 lakh crores for the financial year 2021. The most critical component of this disinvestment plan of the government was an expected receipt of 75,000 crore rupees from a partial sale of the government shareholding in LIC and its consequent listing on the stock markets. The FM said in a budget speech that the government proposes to sell a part of its holding in LIC by way of an IPO. She said that the purpose is to list LIC since that ensures discipline in companies. She then mentioned that it would unlock value for the government in LIC and that it would give retail shareholders a chance to participate in its wealth creation. The FM also said that the IPO and the LIC listing would give various new avenues of fundraising to the Life Insurance Corporation of India. The government's cheerleaders, who tend to overhype every of its moves, quickly touted the proposed LIC IPO, which would be the biggest ever Indian IPO so far, as India's Aramco moment, akin to the IPO and listing of Saudi Aramco, the giant oil company of Saudi Arabia, which was expected to have a market cap of over $1 trillion after its IPO of about $30 billion. The Aramco issue did not quite succeed or go the way it was projected to be. It was overwhelmed, overburdened, and overshadowed by the hype created around it. The overhyped LIC IPO too was destined to not be what it was claimed to be by the finance minister in her budget speech. The LIC's disinvestment was easy said than done, and it had its own set of challenges. Since LIC was a fully government-owned entity, its IPO needed parliamentary approval, and it also needed numerous amendments to various laws before it could go through. It was apparently a long and arduous process, yet in its misplaced enthusiasm, the government then said that the LIC IPO could hit the markets by September 2020 itself, which was not quite possible, and it thus did not happen. The goalpost was then pushed to about December 2020 and then to March 2021, since the LIC sale was the main item in the projected disinvestment receipts of rupees 2.1 lakh crores for financial year 2021. At the time of its initial hype building, the LIC valuation was pegged in the range of rupees 15 lakh crores to imply that it would be the most valuable entity on the bourses and that the government was willing to share its wealth with the common investor. After the government missed its deadline of March 2021, thereafter, with each postponement of the IPO deadline, it was very clear that the government was struggling to launch it, and it was also clear that the benefits of the IPO, such as the unlocking of value of LIC, sharing such value with the public, and disciplining the entity, all mentioned by the finance minister in the budget speech, were not quite getting achieved. It was also evident that the government was devoid of any strategy to launch the LIC IPO on its own terms. And that explains why, despite having decided in January 2020 itself to make the LIC IPO, yet the government was unable to launch the IPO and list LIC in the entire period of 2021, when the IPO markets in India were at a frothy peak, and when even IPOs with the most questionable valuation and pricing and track record were raking in money. That was the time to launch it, and the government failed to do that. A number of challenges and weaknesses of the LIC IPO were exposed during this period of deadline postponements from one month, one quarter to the other. And what were those challenges and weaknesses? The first one, the markets were not convinced of LIC's projected valuation of upwards of 12 lakh crore rupees, and that the valuation would have to be pruned substantially for the IPO to succeed. And that is what had happened. It was finally valued at just about 6 lakh crore rupees. The second issue, the issue size would not be rupees 75,000 crores as the FM had said, and the issue size fell from the initial target of 75,000 crore rupees to 60,000 crore rupees to 50,000 crore rupees, finally landing to an IPO size of just 21,000 crore rupees. The third, it was clear that attractive discounts would have to be given to the LIC policyholders, to LIC employees, and to the retail investors to entice them to subscribe to the issue. The fourth issue was that foreign investors, FIIs, and institutional investors were not impressed, and they thus refused to support the LIC IPO. Just about 3% of the quota for FIIs was subscribed by them. The fifth, with institutional investors refusing to bite the bullet, the marketing focus of LIC was therefore centered on convincing the retail investors to subscribe, which they finally did. The next issue was questions were raised about LIC's poor profits, which was despite LIC not providing for its losses on account of NPAs and on account of poor investments. Reservations were expressed about its inadequacy of disclosures, its reporting and transparency in the financial statements, its missing shareholder democracy, and the need for better accounting policies to be followed by the LIC. With a minuscule 3.5% of its equity being sold, it was also clear that little would change in LIC's management and shareholder representation after its IPO, and its working would continue to remain opaque and not transparent despite it becoming a listed entity after the IPO taking place. Further, the government had a lot of preparatory work to do. It was not as easy as it had projected at the inception, and it was after the preparatory work only that the IPO could materialize, and thus the early timelines that it had initially expected and claimed were just not feasible. The next, for want of genuine investor interest, LIC would have to use its massive marketing network for the issue to succeed, which eventually it did. And finally, what was clear was that with the dizzy IPO heights of 2021 gone, the valuation of LIC and pricing of its shares would have to be moderated considerably in order to attract the investing public. These were the challenges and the weaknesses which were very clear with each postponement of the IPO deadline dates. And that is just what happened when the LIC IPO was recently launched. Its valuation had to be pruned down to rupees 6 lakh crores from the earlier estimates of 12 to 15 lakh crores. A mere 3.5% of its equity could be sold as against the earlier target of 5 to 10%. And despite a muted price of 949 rupees per share, it was mainly subscribed by its policyholders, retail investors, and employees. And FIIs kept away. Institutions did not give it a rousing response, and many policyholders did not subscribe to their quota of shares despite the attractive discount to rupees 60 per share offered to them. Looking to the investor response to the IPO, the pre-listing grey market, which started from a premium of rupees 100 per share, soon collapsed to a discount of rupees 20 per share, mirroring the popular market expectations. The market moods and the investor response had turned the tide, and the premium that it was thought to command was no longer there. It was being traded at a discount in the grey markets. The government cheerleaders were now muted, and their present narrative is that do not expect any listing gains from the IPO, but hold on to the IPO, the LIC share as a long-term investment. Don't sell it now. Of course, that suits the government. The larger issues about the LIC IPO are interesting and they are worthy of a discussion. The first issue, the LIC IPO to us was devoid of a strategy inherent to any large IPO. All that the government wanted was to raise money, which it did, but very poorly by not hitting the IPO at the best time, which is last year, 2021. The only goal it achieved out of the many that the FM had mentioned was unlocking value for the government. Listening to us will do little to discipline LIC, as the finance minister claims. The second point, If you look at the LIC IPO from the parameters of valuation, pricing, issue size, investor participation, investor profile, IPO timing and listing gains, then the IPO was certainly not a success by any of these parameters or measures. The third and very important, with a mere 3.5% shares given to the public, that is just not enough to start a cleanup at LIC and make its functioning more transparent and accountable, which is the most important factor for the build-up of shareholder value in the long term. To us, it's a case of listing tokenism, which will bring in no shareholder democracy and activism in LIC, and thus little will change in the overall management and functioning of the corporation. The next point here comes is that a lot of cleanup is needed in LIC to build up shareholder value and to inspire the market. It has yet not recognized and provided for losses due to NPAs, bad investments, etc. And neither has it marked its investments to the market price to show a true and correct financial position of the organization. Its quality of disclosure and reporting will need significant improvement to make it worthwhile and inspiring for the investors to invest in the shares of LIC. The little public holding in LIC will not be able to prevent the disastrous investment decisions of LIC from time to time, like its purchase of the bankrupt IDBI Bank then for over rupees 50,000 crores, thus putting public money at peril. To us, nothing will stop the government from misusing the LIC money in this manner by this token and specious listing of LIC. And finally, according to us, there is no reason to believe that the IPO and the listing of LIC will transform its management and it will transform its culture to make it a far more efficient and a far more profitable organization. The listing, the debut of the LIC share yesterday at a 9% discount to its issue price are now being attributed by the government bosses to the prevailing bearish and negative sentiments in the secondary markets. They say the secondary markets were not good and thus the listing at a discount. But that's a misleading claim since there was a bull run yesterday itself and the Sensex went up by over 1,000 points, its highest gain in 3 months. And at that time, when there was a bull rush, the LIC debut was at a discount, the share was struggling. The fact is that the euphoria and the hype created by the government cheerleaders is over. And the present popular investment sentiment is not so upbeat about the LIC script. No wonder the government's narrative now is that the LIC script is for the medium term and for the long term only. To us, that's yet another shifting of the goalpost by the government, as we saw in the earlier times when the goalpost of the LIC deadline, the IPO deadline, was shifted from one quarter to the other, as we saw the government struggling to come out with the IPO. And that explains why the investor confidence is not there in the script. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.